It would be somebody pulling me by my legs out of bed. I'd be frozen, I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I tell this story to a lot of people. You either believe it or you don't, but it happened.
It wasn't the kind of place that you just move out of because you just felt like, I mean, this place was beautiful, beautiful, big apartment. And when you hear it for the fourth or fifth time, you start to question things. You're just like, okay, listen, like, either I live in a house with a bunch of real weirdos, or there's something kind of, you know, kind of screwy going on here.
When we first moved in there, it wasn't scary. You didn't look at the home and think, oh my God, I want to live here. But, you know, after being in there for a couple months, then it kind of, driving in the driveway was kind of eerie. The house did look eerie after I had experienced the things I had experienced there.
How much is too much? Sometimes it's fun to scare ourselves. That's why we watch everything from The Shining to Ghostly Encounters. But a little haunting can go a long way, and everybody has a limit. Hi, I'm Lawrence Chow. Today we'll explore those limits as we meet a man and a woman who went from thinking it was interesting to live in a haunted house to being afraid to go home. Kim Favreau and Alex Moriali each found the threshold of what they considered safe, and after that, they had to call in the moving vans. Let's first meet Kim, a young woman from just north of Toronto. Kim was already at a vulnerable place in her life, and all she wanted was to have a normal, happy home.
My mother had died when I was 16. So about 4 years after that, my father decided he was going to move up to Barrie with my other brothers and sisters. So I was dating. I had my boyfriend, Shane, at the time. We decided to move in together. It was an empty home. Our landlord didn't live in the home. She lived up north, so it was just me and Shane together alone. It was quiet, very, very quiet. Of course, being out in the country, too. At first, anyway, it was quiet. I went to college at the time, so I'd be home around 6 o'clock, and I'd go into the kitchen to make dinner. I'd hear a door slam, window shutting. I would also see shadows going by, looking outside the kitchen door into the hallway. Just a figure. I wouldn't be able to tell whether it was a man or a woman, and it would just be some sort of a figured shape. My husband, I'd tell him, and he'd just think I was nuts. You know, it's all in your head. I was upset because it scared me. It did. It did scare me. My mother died, like I said, when I was 16. She had died in our home 3 years prior to that, before I moved into the apartment that I was in. So I don't know, I thought maybe my mother followed me there, maybe she's haunting me. Who knew? All these things. More, that thought crossed my mind more than anything else because of that happening, you know, recently, before I'd moved in there, so I don't know. As the months went on, it just gradually got worse. Everywhere I went in the house, I would feel like somebody was always there. Like when I'd be upstairs in the bathroom having a shower, it'd be like somebody was watching me. I didn't feel that when we first moved into the house. It got to the point where I would be I would come home from school and I wouldn't do anything else but just go right into the living room at first. Just go right into the living room and sit there until my husband came home. I wasn't moving. It got to the point where I would be I would come home from school and I wouldn't do anything else but just go right into the living room at first. And I'd be sitting there and just seeing shadows walk by in the living room or by the door. It gradually got to the point where I wouldn't even go home after school. I would go into town and stay with a friend. I couldn't handle it anymore. The girlfriend that her house I was staying at in town, I'd tell her, well, this is why I'm not going home. And she'd try to convince, Kim, you're just being, you're always worried and thinking about things and you're just, it's all in your head. But it's so easy for somebody to say that when you're experiencing that, going through that. I know it's happening. You can't convince somebody else unless you go through it yourself. I didn't like that feeling. That's my home, that's where I live, and something or someone is keeping me out of my home. When I did come home, I have to come home. Sometimes he wouldn't get home till late. So what I would do is pull in the driveway and then pull my car onto my landlord's grass around to the back of the house so I'd have a quick getaway to get out of the, jump in my car and go. When the landlord had come to collect the rent, she saw the tire tracks around to the back, and she, I don't want you driving up my grass. But I wasn't going to tell my landlord why I was doing that. She asked me why, and I wasn't going to tell her. I didn't want her to think I was crazy. The other interesting thing, too, is when we had first moved in there, our landlord had mentioned she'd had an elderly couple live there for maybe a couple years. I can't remember whether it was just before us or not, and they had died in there. That's what she told me, that the two had passed away there. So whether it had something to do with these two elderly people, don't know. But I had never experienced anything like this in my life. The one thing that really freaked me out and drew the line to get out of there, I didn't want to live there anymore, was being in bed. It would be in the morning. My husband would leave for work around 6 o'clock. I didn't have to get up till about 7 to go to school, so I'd still be in bed. And not too long after he left, I'd hear voices behind me. Hundreds of voices, just whispering and not loud. There wasn't any anger that I could hear. It was just quiet, soft whispering. Couldn't make out what they were saying at all. We had a sleeping bag as our comforter on top. And it would be somebody pulling me by my legs out of bed. And I could hear the sleeping bag being pulled too. I'd be frozen, I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. There was nothing I could do. It's terrifying not being able to move or to speak. I'd be frozen, I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. There was nothing I could do, and I knew I was awake. It's terrifying not being able to move or to speak. I couldn't feel anybody holding on to my legs and pulling me. I couldn't feel anybody holding on. I'd hear the sleeping bag moving, but there's nothing you can do. There's absolutely nothing you can do. Just lay there and just let it happen. And it would last for 60 seconds, and then it just slowly just gone. First time it happened, I was dreaming, you know. Second time it happened, I was dreaming. Third time, fourth time, and fifth time, that was it. I didn't have a shower, go to school in the morning. I was out of there. I got dressed and I was gone. That was it. I didn't spend a lot of time then after. Like, I went to my friend's house. I would wait for my husband to come home after work. It did get to the point where I would end up just leaving when my husband left for work. I wouldn't stay there anymore. No, and he'd laugh at me. He didn't believe me with the morning thing. It got to the point where I finally asked my husband, this was 6 months into living there, I said, you know, I want to get out of here. I'm not living there anymore. I didn't want to go back. Feeling like that, you always expect the worst. Something worse is going to happen, and it gradually did get worse, the things that were happening. So I didn't want to stick around and wait to see what else was going to happen. My landlord came down. And I hadn't said anything to her at this point about anything going on. She asked me the day we moved why we were moving. She said the reason why her son and her didn't live there was because they were seeing things, hearing things, and that's why she didn't live there. So that just topped it up for me. Okay, I'm not crazy. And then I told her, yes, that's why we're leaving. I can't handle living here anymore. So at that point, I then knew, okay, I'm not crazy. I'm not, you know, just dreaming this up. This is actually happening because she's experienced it. She's renting her house out without telling, you know, people about what's going on, and this is why I'm not living there. I would not have rented that place because, again, I was, you know, I had never had that experience before except for when my mother had died. No, I wouldn't live there. Before we moved, she had put the house up for sale. She was not told me she was not going to come and live in that house.
In a search for peace of mind, Kim considered every possible explanation for the scary beings that seemed to be living in her house. Was it her mother? Was it the elderly couple who had died there? In the end, it didn't matter, because when they touched her physically, the experiences escalated from happening around her to happening to her, and that was enough for Kim. Alex Moriali now manages a scooter dealership in Toronto's beaches. But 10 years ago as a student, he found a few surprises when he moved into an old house downtown.
As as a typical young person, I think in Toronto, you don't stay in one place for a long time, so you've moved. You know, you try out new places, try out new neighborhoods, and I think that's when things get, you get to see the differences in places.
Alex likes living in spaces that are a bit off, and his new place was definitely that. But as we're about to see, it eventually got to be a little too strange, and before long, it seemed like their house was a set of a horror movie, even playing out a scene like one in the George C. Scott classic, The Changeling.
It was made to look new, but it was a very old place, and you can feel that. You could feel that things, the doorways were just a little bit angled, the door moldings were never 45 degrees, they were just a little bit off. And the atmosphere felt like that, it felt like everything was just a little bit off. It was a very different group of roommates, very individual, but friends, but not good friends. It wasn't like an open house where you just go into your roommate's room, so it was a very private place. The experience right from the beginning, it was, we moved in and it was hearing noises, particularly in the middle of the night where you would hear walking. Like pacing round and around and around. And sometimes, you knew what was going on. You'd hear it for a long time, but you didn't want to go check it out. And I remember asking, who's walking in the hallway? Why is someone walking up on the landing? It's keeping me up at night. People were just like, no one's walking. There's no one there. At first, it didn't make me feel anything because I don't believe in it. You know what I mean? I didn't. To tell you the truth, I mean, to the point, I still don't believe in it in a way. I mean, when you hear it for the fourth or fifth time, you start to question things. You're just like, okay, listen, like, either I live in a house with a bunch of real weirdos, or there's something kind of screwy going on here. But then after that, things got moved. Things were always moving around. You couldn't find anything you wanted. It wasn't that a week didn't go by without at least a couple things were brought and moved away, moved into places that you didn't want them to be moved in, particularly the area right in front of all the doors. So just a big empty area, there's nothing there, so things were just moved there all the time. Toys especially. The little collectibles I had were always put in the wrong spot. I'm very meticulous with that kind of stuff. Stuff was put downstairs in a locked room. I still to this day can't find them. And a lot of stuff was just moved, like into the hallway, into the area where there was pacing. A lot of the items were moved out there. Oh, at the beginning, yeah, I blamed my room. Like, why'd you go into my room and take that? But then at the same time, even as you're blaming someone, you know that they didn't do it because there's no reason for them to do it. They blamed me too. We all blamed each other, I think, at points. My one roommate, she was an artist, so she had a lot of material in her room, a lot of different items, paintbrushes, clay, and stuff like that. She was in school for art. And so a lot of her materials were destroyed. The clay that she had was obviously for her school projects, so it was left out. I think she blamed herself, to tell you the truth, because it was easier to blame herself, because I didn't think she'd blame any of us, because her door was always locked. No one can ever go in there. She got the worst of it, I think, of everybody. She actually got the worst of it. I remember she woke up in the morning and she was knocking on the door. She's like, points in the hallway, and she's like, I was sleeping all night. I went to bed with my comforter. I remember my comforter. I remember the door locked. And now it's there. It was just put out there, like right where all the other stuff would be. Like nicely, neatly folded. For the rest of us, it was just, when things moved, you're like, okay. Something's moved, something's not right in the place, but for her it was like, she was actually there for us. So I think she felt a little, very, very uncomfortable being that close to something that she had no idea what it was. I have a feeling that someone just didn't want us there. Like, it was just a feeling of unwelcomeness. Move out, or get out, or it was just something that you felt like you had to move. Once particularly, I left the house. Like, I immediately left the house. I was weirded out. My one roommate, we were gonna be going out that night. And he has his toys. It was just one of those plain old shelves above his computer. The door closed. I remember him because we were both leaving our rooms at the same time. So we're standing there waiting to leave the apartment to go out that night. And all of a sudden, just like you hear this noise coming. First reaction is that there's a sound coming from an area where there shouldn't be sound. Because there's no one upstairs. Just like you hear this noise coming. And one of the toys is rolling down the stairs. This little colorful toy coming down the stairs. And that wasn't weird enough, was that because it was a 180-degree turn, the toy came from the top and came down the other side. And I stayed at a friend's house that night because I just didn't want to come home. I just didn't feel comfortable enough to go home. That was just a little too much for me, and I was just like, I think it's time to look for another place myself.
Pushed to the brink by the tumbling toy, Alex moved out. But he's not scared of the supernatural in general, just the way he felt it manifested itself in his house. And even though Kim reached a limit of how much haunting she could take, she is still fascinated by ghosts. Neither Alex nor Kim had their beliefs changed by their experiences, but living in those houses, being afraid to go home, helped them learn what their thresholds are for being able to engage those beliefs.
My take on my experience is an experience that'll last the rest of my life. You hear about these things, but to actually experience it yourself, it's interesting, and I would sound strange like it to happen again.
I can say I was, privy to something that I can't explain. I'm pretty skeptical still, but it's, don't be too quick to dismiss it, because maybe there's something you can't understand.